3 years ago, on a night I should have just kept driving, I found something in the snow that should not have existed. I've never told anyone this story out loud, not in its full truth, because it still feels like a memory that doesn't belong to this world. Yet every time I glance at the carved wooden medallion on my dresser, I know it wasn't a dream. It's the weight of that memory that keeps me awake, and tonight I'll let it unfold as it really happened. It was February, the kind of winter where the mountains look like they're trying to erase every trace of life beneath white silence. I was leaving the mill after a late shift, already past midnight. The storm had rolled in faster than anyone expected. Snow hammered the windshield, and the world shrank to the thin yellow ribbon of my headlights. The mountain road I'd take home is a shortcut, 15 miles of switchbacks and blind curves, hugging a frozen creek most of the way. People say only fools or locals drive it in winter. That night, I suppose I was both. 10 miles an hour felt too fast. My tires kept drifting as if the earth underneath was shifting. Not solid ground, but some restless thing waiting to give way. Then, through the curtain of snow, I caught sight of it. A dark heap at the edge of the frozen creek. At first, I thought it was a downed tree branch or maybe a deer carcass. But the shape didn't fit. Too compact, too deliberate, like something placed there. My chest tightened, and for a split second I considered just passing by. The storm was bad enough without stepping into it. Yet something inside me wouldn't let me. Even as the rational part of me screamed, "Keep driving," my hands were already easing the truck onto the shoulder. I killed the headlights but kept the engine running. The heater roared, fighting a losing battle against the frost that crawled across the glass. I reached for my flashlight, the metal biting my fingers through my gloves, and stepped out. The cold was so sharp it felt like glass shards on my skin. Wind clawed through the trees, and the snow hit my face in sideways sheets, filling the air with white static. Each step crunched deep into the powder, the sound too loud against the storm's muffled roar. My flashlight beam jumped through the blizzard, catching only fragments, bark glazed with ice, skeletal branches twitching in the wind, a ripple in the frozen creek. Then the beam landed on the shape. My breath stopped. It wasn't a deer, wasn't any animal I'd ever seen. Small, the size of a child, maybe 8 years old, but covered in thick, dark fur. A tree limb, easily 2 feet thick, pinned its leg against the ice. Its chest heaved in shallow, frantic rhythm. Bluish lips trembled against sharp teeth, and its closed eyes twitched as though caught in a fevered dream. I wanted to run. God help me, I wanted to pretend I'd seen nothing. But my feet betrayed me. I knelt, snow soaking through my jeans, and brushed my glove across its fur. The warmth was faint, fading fast, but it was there. Real, alive. I stumbled back to the truck, grabbed the jack from my toolbox, and dragged it through the snow. My hand shook as I set it under the branch, each crank echoing like a gunshot in the storm. For a moment I was sure it wouldn't work, that the tree was too heavy, but inch by inch the branch lifted. The creature stirred, let out a sound, not a growl, not a cry, something in between. A sound that clung to me like a plea. When the gap was just wide enough, I slid my arms under its body and pulled. The weight surprised me. Not heavy, maybe 60 pounds, yet dense, like every ounce was muscle and bone. Its fur was coarse on the outside but softer underneath, trapping heat against failing skin. Its head lolled against my arm, and for the briefest moment, one eye opened, dark, nearly black, reflecting my flashlight in a way that made it look bottomless. Not wild, not human. Something in between, something aware. I wrapped it in the emergency blanket I kept behind the seat and laid it in the truck bed. My breath fogged heavy against the glass as I stared at it through the rear window, watching the blanket rise and fall. I couldn't take it to a hospital. What would I even say? "Excuse me, I found a..." What, exactly? The authorities would take it, dissect it, lock it away in some cold lab. No, if this thing had a chance to live, I had to take it somewhere. It wouldn't be turned into an experiment. There was only one person I could trust. A friend of mine who lived deeper in the mountains, a man who'd built his own cabin off-grid. No internet, no phone. Just a wood stove, a couple of dogs, and a past he never spoke about. He didn't ask questions he didn't want the answers to. If anyone would help me figure out what to do, it was him. The drive was an hour of crawling through ice-slicked switchbacks, the storm pressing in like the mountain was trying to smother me. I honked when I reached his cabin, headlights flashing against log walls half buried in snow. He came out with a shotgun in one hand and suspicion in his eyes. But when I pulled back the blanket in the truck bed, his face changed. He lowered the gun without a word. We carried the creature inside, laying it near the fire. For the next day, it didn't move. Its breathing rattled like dry leaves in a storm gutter. My friend splinted its leg with old military precision, his hand steady while mine trembled. We checked its chest. Its temperature fed the fire higher and higher. Each time I thought the breathing would stop, the creature shuddered and clung to life a little longer. It woke at midnight the next day, eyes snapping open, wide and terrified. It dragged itself into the corner, grunting and baring small but sharp teeth, its splinted leg dragging uselessly. We backed away, leaving food and water near the fire. Slowly, over hours, it stopped trembling. It never took its eyes off us, but it drank, ate, slept, woke again. Bit by bit, its panic softened into something else. Not trust exactly, but a fragile truce. What unsettled me most wasn't the fur or the broken leg or the uncanny face. It was the way it watched, not like an animal watching a threat, more like a child watching adults trying to guess what came next. Once, when I pointed at the water bowl, it followed my gesture, then pointed back when it wanted more. It wasn't mimicry. It understood. Every night, as the wind howled around the cabin, it would glance at the door and then at me, raising a hand to point toward the mountains. Always the same direction. Always with a sound that was softer than any of its others, almost like a name whispered into the dark. The third night, just before dawn, I woke to a noise outside. Not the storm, not the trees. A call, low, drawn out, echoing through the peaks. The creature bolted upright, eyes wide, and let out a reply so loud it shook the windows. It was answering something out there. By morning, there were footprints in the snow, enormous, 3 times the size of mine, pressed deep despite the storm's effort to erase them. They circled the cabin once before vanishing into the woods. My friend and I stood over them, silence heavy between us. We didn't say it out loud, but we knew. The creature hadn't been left to die alone. It had family. They were looking for it. That was when the fear turned into something else. A realization that the impossible wasn't just breathing in our cabin. It was out there, moving through the snow, watching us from the tree line. I thought the worst was behind me, but I was wrong. Because that night, as the fire burned low and the creature finally slept without trembling, I woke again. This time it wasn't a sound that pulled me from sleep. It was a feeling, like the cabin itself was being studied from every angle. The shadows outside seemed too still, as if they were holding their breath, waiting. I turned my head toward the window, and there, just for a second before the snow swallowed it, something massive shifted against the trees, taller than any man, broad enough to block the starlight. And then it was gone. The figure at the window haunted me long after it vanished into the storm. I told myself it could have been a trick of the snow, a branch swaying, shadows colliding in the wind. But deep down, I knew what I had seen. Something massive, upright, and watching us. The weight of that stare lingered in my chest like an echo. The young one slept through it all, curled in blankets near the fire, its chest rising steady now, each breath a reminder that I'd stepped into something far larger than myself. My friend didn't mention the window. Maybe he hadn't seen it, or maybe he had, and silence was the only way he could process it. Either way, when dawn broke, neither of us spoke about what pressed itself against the cabin walls during the night. Instead, we watched the creature. Its strength was returning. It limped, but the break was healing fast, unnaturally fast. Within a week, it could hobble with a stick for balance. Within 2, it managed short, tentative steps on its own. Its intelligence bloomed each day like something waking from a long sleep. It mimicked sounds we made, pointed at objects it wanted, even figured out how to gesture when it was cold or hungry. The way its eyes followed every move, calculated, judged, remembered. Those eyes unsettled me more than its teeth ever could. But it wasn't just learning from us. It was calling. Every night, once the fire dimmed and the storm settled into quiet, it would stand by the door, splinted leg trembling beneath its weight, and let out soft, mournful sounds into the forest. At first we thought it was random, but then came the replies. Always distant, always carried on the wind. A chorus hidden beyond the tree line. Never close, but never gone. The mountains themselves seemed to answer back. My friend and I would lie awake listening to those exchanges, our bodies rigid under blankets, pretending not to hear, pretending we weren't part of the conversation simply by sheltering the one who called. By the 3rd week, the creature grew restless. It would point toward the mountains, toward some place only it knew, repeating the gesture with a growing urgency. It would pace the cabin as much as its healing leg allowed, and each time the door opened to let the dogs out, it would lurch forward as if ready to escape, not from fear, but from longing. I knew then what we had to do. We couldn't keep it. We couldn't hand it over. Its family was out there, waiting, searching, and we were standing in the way. My friend resisted at first. He said we didn't know what we'd find if we followed those calls. He said maybe they weren't family at all, but something else, something that wouldn't forgive us for interfering. I told him we had no choice. If we left the young one behind, it would eventually try to leave on its own, and in its fragile state, the wilderness would swallow it whole. If we returned it, maybe the ones out there would understand. Maybe they would show mercy. Or maybe not. Either way, it wasn't ours to keep. We waited for clear skies, the first break in the endless February storms. Then, before dawn, we packed heavy food, blankets, tools, rifles we hoped we'd never use. The young one nearly vibrated with excitement when it saw the packs. It pointed to the mountains over and over, grunting like a drumbeat. It knew. It understood where we were going. We left the cabin behind, with dogs barking at our backs and snow crunching beneath our boots. The cold had sharpened overnight, each breath slicing my lungs, but the sky was clear and heavy with stars. The creature walked beside me for a while, then tired and clambered onto my back. It was surprisingly light, its small hands gripping my shoulders, its body heat bleeding into me. As we climbed deeper into the wilderness, its unease melted. For the first time since I'd found it, it seemed alive with joy. The forest thickened around us, branches heavy with snow, silence so complete it pressed like a weight. No birds, no deer, not even the chatter of squirrels. It was the silence of being observed. I knew in my bones we weren't alone. Shadows lingered longer than they should have, and sometimes just beyond the edges of sight, snow shifted without wind. My friend noticed too. His hand never strayed far from the rifle strapped to his pack. The first night we camped in a hollow sheltered by rock. We lit no fire, not daring to draw attention, but the creature seemed unbothered by the cold. It curled up in its own sleeping bag, eyes half-lidded, listening. Then, from somewhere beyond the ridge, the calls began again. Deep, resonant, carrying for miles. This time the young one answered with a force that startled me, a cry so strong it reverberated in my chest. The mountain answered back, voices multiplying, weaving into each other like some hidden choir. I barely slept, lying awake under the stars, staring into the black timberline, waiting for shapes to emerge. By morning they had. Not bodies, not faces, just evidence. Tracks in the snow surrounding our camp. Enormous, deliberate prints pressed in a circle, as though something had moved around us in the night, watching. The stride length was impossible, far greater than any man's. The young one pointed at the prints, eyes wide with recognition, and made a sound so joyful it cracked something inside me. It knew them. It knew who had been there. We broke camp early, following the tracks higher into the peaks. The young one walked now without help, limping but determined, its small footprints lining up with the colossal ones. The storm had left the world raw, and crystalline sunlight stabbing through icicles, air so clear it hurt to breathe. Yet beneath all that beauty was a dread that burrowed under my skin. Every step carried us deeper, into a place that felt less like wilderness and more like territory. Not ours, theirs. By midday, the creature grew restless, calling more frequently, its voice urgent. The replies came closer, echoing through valleys, bouncing from cliff to cliff until the sound felt like it came from everywhere at once. My friend's jaw was set tight, eyes scanning the tree line, every muscle on edge. He whispered that we should turn back, that we'd gone far enough. I shook my head. We were past the point of return. Then, at last, the forest opened. A wide clearing lay before us, rimmed by towering pines older than anything I'd ever seen. The snow here was untouched, pristine, glittering in the sun. The young one froze, lifted its head, and let out a call that was louder, deeper, more commanding than any before. The sound cut through the mountains like a blade. The silence that followed was unbearable. My breath fogged thick, hanging in the air between us as if waiting too. And then they came. From the far side of the clearing, 3 shapes moved through the trees. At first, I thought the forest itself was shifting, the trunks breaking away. But then I saw them towering figures, fur matted with snow, shoulders broad enough to eclipse the pines behind them. They walked upright, each step heavy, deliberate. The ground seemed to bend under their weight. The young one let out a piercing cry and began hobbling toward them. The largest figure, at least 8 feet tall, broke into a run, closing the distance in seconds. The reunion was fierce and tender all at once, the massive hands lifting the small, one as if it were weightless, holding it close, checking the splinted leg, running thick fingers over its ribs and face. 2 more shapes gathered around, their deep grunts rumbling like speech, layered with relief. My friend and I stood frozen at the edge of the clearing, unable to move, unable to breathe. We had brought it home, but in doing so, we had stepped into the gaze of something no human was meant to witness. The largest turned then, eyes locking on us. Dark eyes, ancient and deliberate, reflecting the same intelligence I'd seen in the young one, but heavier, sharper, as if carrying the weight of generations. Slowly it moved toward us, snow crunching under its massive feet, each step shaking through my boots. It stopped only 10 feet away. The air between us felt charged, as though the forest itself was waiting for the verdict. It reached into the thick fur on its chest, pulled something free, and lowered it to the ground before stepping back. A small carved wooden medallion, intricate patterns etched into its surface, spirals and lines that caught the sun. A gift or a warning, or both. I didn't dare move to pick it up. My hands shook at my sides. The creature's stare never wavered, and for the first time in my life I felt truly measured. Not as prey, not as threat, but as something judged. Then the young one cried out again, waving toward us, its hand open, a sound that carried a tone I almost understood, like a word I'd forgotten how to hear. The larger figures rumbled deep replies, and in that frozen, blinding clearing, I realized this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning, because the moment their eyes met mine, I knew we hadn't just saved one of them. We had crossed into their world, and once you step across that line, there's no going back. The clearing emptied so quickly it felt unreal, like snow swallowing footprints, before you can convince yourself they were ever there. One moment there were towering figures reclaiming their young, the next only drifting flakes, a silence so thick it pressed against my ears. My friend and I stood there, still, not daring to breathe too loudly. The only proof of what we'd seen was the medallion burning, like a coal against my chest pocket, and the hollow thud of my heartbeat refusing to calm. We didn't speak on the way down. The young one was gone. The family had taken it back into their world, a world stitched into ridges and shadows we had no business entering. Each switchback toward the cabin felt heavier, as if the mountain itself was reminding us we were guests who had overstayed. Back at the cabin, the fire crackled and hissed, but the warmth didn't reach me. I pulled the medallion out for the first time, turning it in my hand. It wasn't just carved wood. The patterns felt purposeful, etched with a skill that didn't come from accident. Lines ran like veins, intersecting at shapes that looked like rivers, valleys, mountains. A map, maybe, or a story. The grooves were deep, worn, as if fingers far larger than mine had traced them for years. I set it down on the table, but even in the firelight it looked alive, like it was still holding heat from the hand that gave it to me. My friend poured 2 glasses of whiskey, but his hands trembled too much to hold his. He muttered something about never telling anyone. I nodded. We didn't need to make a pact. The silence was already sealed. Who would believe us? And worse, what would happen if someone did? The weeks that followed were ordinary, at least on the surface. I went back to work at the mill. The whistle still blew at 7 a.m. The same machines roared. The same men cursed and joked over their shifts. But the noise felt hollow, like I was hearing life secondhand. At night, I'd catch myself staring at the tree line from my porch, waiting for something. Then came the first gift. It was subtle. A river stone, smooth and gray, placed neatly in the center of my porch one morning. I'd picked it up, confused, and noticed a line of red quartz running through it like a scar. I don't know why, but I put it on the windowsill. A week later, it was a carved stick, spiraled with notches so delicate they caught the light like threads. Then a wildflower, wrong season, wrong soil, set gently against my door. Each one appeared without me ever seeing who left it. They weren't accidents. They weren't pranks. They were reminders, tokens, a language I couldn't read but somehow understood. I began leaving things in return: a piece of venison, a tin cup of berries, a folded cloth. In the morning, they were always gone, and sometimes in their place another carving would be waiting. The medallion stayed on my dresser, but it never felt like mine. More like a loan, a responsibility. Each night before bed I'd hold it, tracing the grooves. Over time, the shapes started to make sense. One pattern matched the bend of the creek where I'd first found the young one. Another looked like the slope above my friend's cabin. The spiral was different. It set apart from the rest, a small mark tucked at the edge, as if pointing to something outside the known. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was nothing. But at night I started dreaming. Dreams of snowfields that stretched too far, of pines that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking, of voices calling from ridges just out of reach. Always in the dream I held the medallion, and the spiral glowed like a coal. 6 months after the rescue, I nearly died. I was out hunting when the forest dropped into that wrong kind of silence, not peaceful, but carved clean of sound, as if the world was holding its tongue. I turned, and 30 yards away, a black bear, a massive male, stood low to the ground, ears pinned, breath puffing in short, angry bursts. It stepped toward me. My rifle was strapped to my back, useless at that distance. I could feel the ground in my chest with each of its steps. Then came the call, deep, resonant, from up the slope behind me. The bear froze mid-step. Another call, closer. Then a third from my left. The bear spun, eyes wide, pacing backward. Then, with a guttural roar, it turned and crashed into the trees, fleeing. The woods went silent again, but it wasn't empty. I could feel them, watching, protecting. I dropped to my knees, shaking, breath spilling white into the air. They hadn't just taken their young back. They'd claimed me too, in some way I didn't understand. I wasn't prey. I wasn't threat. I was something else. Something seen. After that, I couldn't stay away from the mountains. I started walking the trails more often, not with a gun, but with my eyes open. I noticed cairns of stones stacked too neatly to be chance. Branches bent in patterns that looked like signposts if you tilted your head. The forest wasn't random anymore. It was written, and though I couldn't read the whole language, I caught glimpses of its grammar. When hikers passed through town, I found myself steering them towards safer routes, mentioning storms, broken trails, rock slides, anything to keep them from pushing too deep. My friend called it paranoia, but I think he knew. The mountains weren't mine to give, but I could guard them in small ways, quiet ways. Then came the second gift that nearly broke me. I'd left dried venison on the porch one night, a habit by then. In the morning, in its place, was a carving, 2 figures, one larger, one smaller, standing side by side, both holding something between them that looked like the medallion. I sat on the porch with it in my hands for an hour before I could even move. It wasn't just thanks, it was memory. Proof that what happened in that clearing lived in their world too. And yet, with each gift, the spiral on the medallion grew heavier in my thoughts. I traced it so often I could feel it even when I wasn't touching the wood. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a direction, a place they wanted me to know. Lately, I've been waking from dreams with the same image burned behind my eyes. A cave mouth, half hidden by snow and shadow, waiting like an open throat. Each time I dream it, I wake with the medallion in my hand, though I never remember reaching for it. I tell myself I'll ignore it, that I've already gone too far, already risked too much. But when I stand on my porch at dusk and the wind shifts just right, carrying a faint echo from the peaks, I feel the weight of unfinished business pressing on me like the mountain itself, leaning close. I think they're calling me, not with voices, but with silence, not with sight, but with gifts. And the spiral is no longer just a mark on wood. It's a path, and the question I can't shake is this: do I follow it? Or do I keep pretending my life is still my own? The mountains haven't answered. Not yet. But I feel the time coming when they will. And I'm not sure I'll be able to say no. I tried to live with the spiral as a secret thought, the way you carry a melody under your tongue all day without humming it. But secrets aren't still things. They throb. They tap the ribs from the inside. By late autumn, I'd stopped pretending. The medallion sat in my palm each evening, the carved ridges warm from skin and memory, and my thumb kept finding that small, tucked spiral again and again, until I could have traced it in the dark. When the first snow dusted the ridge lines, I knew I would go. I told no one. Not my friend at the cabin who could read my face better than I liked. Not the men at the mill. Not the bartender who slid me my coffee before sunrise like a ritual. I simply packed as if for an ordinary winter hike and left before the town was awake, enough to notice one more truck sliding onto the mountain road. The forest greeted me with that winter kind of quiet that isn't absence, but tension, like a bowstring pulled and waiting. The air had a taste metallic, cold enough at the back of the throat to make me cough. I moved fast along the lower switchbacks and slow on the exposed slopes, following the old deer paths until their tracks broke into wind-rubbed powder. The medallion rode inside my jacket, close enough that its shape pressed a faint circle into my chest with every breath. By midday, the sky had dropped into a single sheet of gray, the kind that erases distance and makes the next stand of pines feel as far as another country. I should have turned back then, but the spiral had me by a thread I could not cut. The first sign arrived in the snow, like a sentence I was meant to read. 3 stones, stacked smallest on a mossed stump, their red quartz seams aligned as if a wire ran through them. Not a child's cairn, not accident. I knelt, watched the surrounding white for a tail of tracks, saw none. The wind had scoured the surface clean, or else something had moved in a way that didn't leave the kind of story I'd been taught to read. I touched the top stone with a gloved finger. It rocked and settled as if acknowledging me, then went still. I climbed into the country where storms like to sit, a bowl of broken ridges and gullies that hold snow even when the valleys are bare. Here the trees grew older and farther apart, their trunks black against the pallid light. A raven shadow crossed me without a sound, then doubled back, riding a ripple of air I couldn't feel. I kept turning the medallion in my pocket, tracing my way along grooves that matched the slope under my boots with an accuracy that made my scalp prickle. I wasn't navigating by the sun or the creek anymore. I was following a memory pressed into wood. Back home, I set the medallion on the dresser where it has always lived, laid the small carved figures beside it, and then the new loop of bark. The 3 objects didn't look like prizes. They looked like verbs. On the back of the medallion, near the spiral, I noticed a mark I had never seen, a notch so fine you'd miss it if you weren't tracing by hunger. The notch pointed not to a place on the map, but to a blank spot where no lines had been carved at all. Not omission, intention. Space left for something not yet drawn. I should have slept. Instead, I sat with the objects in the lamplight, listening for the mountain inside the hum of my refrigerator. When dawn came, I carried the loop to the porch and held it up to the ridge. Through the small circle, the mountain framed itself in a way the naked eye had never managed. Peaks lined in a pattern I recognized from the cave wall and the medallion's face, a sequence of angles that felt like a sentence learning to pronounce me. In that tiny ring, the tree line shifted, just a fraction, as if the trees were adjusting their shoulders to hide or reveal something only this circle could coax. I lowered the loop, and the mountain went back to mountain. I raised it, and the pattern clicked into place again. I understood only this much. The map was not finished. The story wasn't either. I had not reached an end. I had reached the place where endings are chosen. I put the loop in my pocket and stood there a long time with my breath fogging the cold, waiting for the ridge to tell me which way to go next, waiting for a call that might sound like a hum or a silence or the snap of a single twig answering a question I hadn't thought to ask. When nothing came, I laughed once, quietly, because of course it wouldn't. It was my turn to decide. I stepped back inside, closed the door against the weather, and felt the house shift around me, the way a living thing adjusts to the heartbeat of whoever just entered. The medallion lay still on the dresser, its spiral no longer glowing, and yet somehow brighter than ever, the notch pointing at what wasn't there yet. and I realized I hadn't brought the cave figure home at all. I had brought home a promise. The wind rose and then settled, the long, patient kind that can erase a set of tracks in the time it takes to change your mind. I stood in the quiet and listened for the mountains inside me, and in that unseeable distance, I thought I heard a sound too soft to swear by, like a word that hasn't decided what mouth will speak it.